Kia ora te marana, kia whakapapa punama te moana, hei huarahi ma tato e te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tato I a tato katoa, hui e, taiki e. And that, while it says, may peace be widespread, may the sea be like greenstone, a pathway for us all this day. Let us show respect for each other, for one another. Bind us all together. Thank you. Good morning, Morena councillors. Welcome to stage 2 of the first of a series of budget workshops. I would like us to go around again this morning. We do have internet access restored, so we are being live streamed. So we will all go around and introduce ourselves. My name is Vinci Belante. I am the long-term plan project lead. And I will pass on to my left.
Kia ora everyone, I'm Nigel Trainer. I'm the Chief Executive.
Good morning, Andrea Rankin, Chief Financial Officer.
Good morning everyone, Scott Shannon, Councillor.
Good morning everyone, Councillor Michelle Pye.
Councillor Stu Piddington. Mayor Nigel Bowen, and we have an apology for the workshop from Councillor Oliver, who may be on live stream intermittently.
Councillor Booth.
Atamaria, good morning, Councillor Sally Parker.
Morning, Councillor Owen Jackson.
Kia ora, Councillor Peterbert.
Good morning, Councillor Stacey Scott.
Thank you. Okay, councillors, this morning we have a few things to get to. We are doing a slight pivot from last week's format. With our new Chief Executive now on board, there's a few more objectives we need to reach for today. So the first thing we're going to do is have an update on the Chief Executive's budget review process that he is now instating. We will be looking at the mayor's scenario for the budgets that he proposed last week, looking at a 12% rate rise with 6% thereafter on a flattened scale. Then we're looking at a potential staff scenario from the chief executive, looking at an alternating one. We're looking at depreciation and revaluation, and then we're having the key projects updates from Three Waters and Roading, so you can ask the questions related to specific items in their budget if you wish. Then we're actually going to be looking at instating an idea that came up last week about having the budget review working group, who I like to call the Frugal Five. Then we're looking at the debt caps, rate rise principles for the financial strategy, because we do need some clear direction on those to finish that strategy and the infrastructure strategy. And then, of course, there will be time for questions. I'd like to hand over now, then, thank you to our Chief Executive, who will take you through a wee bit of an overview of how we place compared to other councils.
Just a bit of an overview. Look, Timaru District Council is in exactly the same position as most councils in the country. An economic update showed that the percentage increase for rates right across the country is outstripping inflation, and I'll talk about some reasons for that soon, and that is not unique to Timaru. This first slide shows us where Timaru District Council sits in terms of provincial councils. So we're 21st out of 24 for the average residential rate. So you can see the red line there, that is Timaru. So Timaru, ratepayers in Timaru are enjoying lower rates than other provincial centres. If TDC has a 12% rate increase this round, and assuming all others have a 10% increase, we go up to number 19, which is still one of the lower rates in the country in terms of provincial councils. Now, I did a quick calculation. So if we moved up to the same rate as Waitaki, it would be 0.8% increase. So, and assuming they did the same as us. If we were to move to the same as Ashburton, it would be a 1.36% increase catch up to get to the Ashburton level, which is in the higher half of the councils. If we went to the same as Wanganui, it would be 1.69. Now those centres are similar in terms of population size and us. So you can see that we do have we are at the lower end, and we need to start thinking hard about that. And I just thought we'd put that into context before I have our conversations. And it's something we really need to think about. Previous 2 decades, and I'd suggest this is right across the country, not just Timaru as well, that rates have been kept artificially low. And that's a construct of probably a number of factors. So if you look at our next bullet point, depreciation underfunded, I would suggest right across the country, again, in local government, depreciation has been underfunded, which has created a situation where the reserves are not there to replace the assets. And that is leading to the challenge we're facing right now in terms of potential rate increases and the debt ceiling levels. And I'll be honest, the same situation happened in health, where people would play with the valuations to try and keep them down, to keep the bottom line at a break even. Now, to do depreciation really well, we should get into a cycle of revaluing all assets, and we should be honest about that revaluation. Now, that revaluation leads to higher depreciation, which leads to the need to fund that depreciation, to build the funds to replace the assets. And unfortunately in this country, we haven't been doing that as a country. And we need to think hard about the parameters of how we do that and who funds that and how it's funded. That leads to the next point, the reserves are not built up. So they haven't been built up because of that. Another part with the depreciation regime, there's a tendency to revalue some assets, but you don't change the useful life. And again, we've got to get into a regime as well of saying, if we revalue, does that asset have a longer life than it currently has? And I think we'll find a number do, because we are doing work on them as we go. All of that leads to a build-up of the need to increase rates and a build-up to increase debt. Now, we shouldn't be afraid of debt, but what we've got to do is make sure that we can afford the debt we have. And it should be cyclical. We should be able to gear up our level debt, but we should be able to bring it back down again as those assets are ageing. And so as we're in a situation again to either redraw debt and the reserves to replace, because when we go to replace them, they will be more expensive than the current. And again, that's why the revaluation regime is so important, to keep those assets lined up with what they would cost to replace. We, as a council, have a focus on addressing community needs for infrastructure and community projects. And again, that is coming to a head because of the age of most of those assets. They're all coming to a head at the same time. And put on top of that, the issues with earthquake compliance, that is adding another fuel to the fire. Okay, so the combination of increasing asset values, interest rates and government policy has resulted in a series of challenges that we as a council have to solve. And look, it is solvable. There will be an answer. It may mean that we've got to push out some of our plans. It may mean that we've actually got some tighter years, but we really need to put our shoulder to the wheel and work out what is the best solution for our community. Just on our operations, we will be looking at reviewing our OPEX in the next couple of days, again, because any scenario we've got at the moment shows a deficit. I don't like deficits, because what gives is the building those reserves for replacements of assets. But you can't solve them overnight, and it might be that we've got to work out what is the pattern to get us to that break even. How many years will we tolerate deficits to get back to break even? Because you can't do it overnight. You've still got to keep delivering services, and you've got to keep things going. So just a bit of context in our staff. Over 2/3 of our workforce is service delivery, infrastructure, regulatory and customer services. So that's an excellent balance, that we do have staff that are committed to the public services in Timaru. We're 4th out of 24 on that scale. So you can see our staff profile is aimed at delivering services. A number of other profiles are less so. We run a relatively lean organisation, so we have 0.6 FTE for every resident. We come in 15th out of 24. So we're in the middle of the pack. We're not the leanest, but we're also not the highest. We're at the higher end of the mid-range for the number of managers. We're 9th out of 4 other provincial hospitals, but our remuneration is lower. Good old Timaru. But we're more aligned on chief executives, where the remuneration is right in the middle of the pack. So not chief executives, executive managers. So we need to work out have we got that balance right as well. We spend less on consultants. We use consultants and contractors for specialist expertise, so we're 34th out of 52. So again, we're sort of in the middle of the pack on the slightly lower side. But that's not to say we shouldn't keep testing that and making sure that we're only employing consultants that we really need to. I'm always of the mind that we employ people for their expertise, and we should use that expertise before going outside. And that's part of what I want to look at. So what we've decided to do is today, from this workshop, we are looking forward to getting some parameters that you feel comfortable with, and I'm hoping there will be a good debate. And debate is excellent in democracy, and we really do need to debate those things. Then what we're going to do from the next 3 days is we, as an SLT, are going to challenge ourselves, challenge each other in terms of the OPEX that we've got in our budgets, and also the CAPEX in terms of timing and potentially the priorities that we get from the conversations that councillors have had. Any savings from the process have not been factored into these numbers. When you see the numbers, I think they're still raw. We've still got a lot of finessing to do, and Andrew and I discussed that this morning. There's a lot of numbers that still need to be pulled out and really examined to make sure they feel right. You know, things like, have we got the OPEX in for when we finish the Theatre Royal? Have we got the road OPEX in for that? Have we got periodic revaluations assumed in there? So we've actually got a much sounder financial 10-year forecast to actually go from. In addition, a full reforecast of the Council's anticipated position at 30th of June will also be happening, so we've got that underway. And the forecast will look at the revenue and the expenditure, obviously. I'm going to hand back to Lindsay. So any comments on that? So it's just a bit of an overview. Plenty of work to do.
Just regarding rates, I mean, what you've thrown up suggests a 102% rate rise in 10 years, which is kind of massive. I mean, when you take it off in little chunks, it means doubling in that time. So again, we've got to look really carefully at our budgets, I think, and do what is absolutely not necessary, not the like to have. And I guess in saying that, rather than bat the ball, I'd like to look at some of these major projects that we obviously can't afford, because either plan that you've got, we've got to save either 140 or 150 million in 3 years. We've got to get real with some of these really large projects and decide what's going to happen with them before we go down to the little bits and pieces that are important. But yeah, I guess there's realities around that. Thanks.
Just commenting around where we're placed, number 4 out of 24, I guess. If we were to be operating a balanced budget, we would have need to have increased our rates by 33%, which would take us up to about 335, which would make us 4th on that list. And anything below that, basically we're being subsidised now by future ratepayers. And last year it was 22 million, and this year it's shaping up to be pretty bad as well. So in my mind, that's the first thing that we actually address before we actually start thinking about how we can spend money.
But you can't make that analysis because you're assuming that every other council has a 0% rate increase and that they don't move. But all councils will move, and some councils in the media are reporting worse issues than we were. So it won't be the case. Your point is still correct around, I get what you're trying to say, but yeah.
Thank you, councillors. That is very useful feedback for us and help to inform our meetings over the next few days when we're actually looking at a lot of the budgets. We'll keep those things in mind and hopefully be able to address them. Keeping in mind that it will never be perfect. We'll be doing the best that we can in the given circumstances that we find ourselves. The same with every other council. But we appreciate your commitment to supporting us to present the best scenario that we can to give you guys something concrete to make some decisions on.
Sorry, Lindsay, Stu made an interesting point. You know, we all know that rule of 72, eventually you'll double your rates, and that's fine. But it'll be interesting to do some analysis, because that's what will come back at us. But it'll be interesting to do some analysis around incomes, etc. Period, what's expected. To Stacey's point last week around those fixed income ones, let's sort of understand around their basket of goods that they're consuming on in a given year, and extra increases coming from government, etc., and where that's likely to go, so we can help tell that story. Because it's not necessarily a bad thing, because incomes might increase, over that period to nullify it effectively. We don't know that unless we do some analysis.
That would be really good to be able to actually do an impact analysis accompanying whatever figures we provide. I'm sure we can achieve that for you.
And also from a retrospective position, we all know that people go on about property increases all the time and they can't be sustained, and yet they are continually sustained and keep moving. It'd be nice to know I know that we haven't been as strong, I suppose, in terms of where our increases have been for increased rates, but what has that been as a percentage moving for the last 10 years? So that gives us some sort of idea that it does exponentially increase.
And that's a very key point that's very pertinent, because at this present point in time, revaluations of properties is happening, and I'm sure Andrea might be able to speak a little bit about that, because they definitely do have an impact on us, particularly with land values going up. Thank you very much. Okay, so what we will be looking for outcomes from today. After this meeting, and we have gone through all of the budgets over the next few days, prior to Christmas, you will receive a set of updated activity management plans with the corrected activity budgets based on what our funding review will be looking like. And there is a very high likelihood to make some impact in some areas that have been running pretty lean. You may have to look at changing the levels of service of that particular activity if you want to make further reductions. So that's just the reality. You'll also receive corporate activities budgets, which are the ones that really fall under the realm of the chief executive, so that you will have transparency of all the activities that come under your long-term plan. You'll receive the draft capital program budget showing both the 2.1 and 2.5 debt to ratio target. And what we would like you to do is to individually reflect on those while you're reviewing them and have a go at cutting the available debt to fit it for what you are proposing. That's your ability to actually kind of consider it your own little Lego project of what are the blocks you're going to keep in for that budget and what are you going to put aside that you do individually. So the next time you come together, that you can do a comparison and have that open and honest conversation about priorities, okay? And then we will be looking at that budget review working group to be established to facilitate the feedback for us on proposed reductions, particularly while we're working on this in December and January before we come back together at the end of January. So we will do that at the conclusion of this meeting, get the nominations for who you would like to be on that. So now I'm going to hand over to our Chief Financial Officer, Andrea, and she is going to take you through the budget update. And while she does that, I will be handing out a hard copy in large format for you councillors to be able to follow.
So we've put together two scenarios for discussion today. These two scenarios were based on the Mayor's suggestion around what he would like to see in regards to percentage.
Sorry, just a note on that. I thought it was a good place to start, and it's not a Wayne Brown approach to to running the town, but a starting point.
It's a starting point for discussion. Essentially, we have to start somewhere. We also...
Can I just interrupt? Just for everyone's point of view, these are two scenarios. They are not the final product. And they are scenarios to gender, to get conversation going. So as we can actually have a really good conversation about the moving parts, the levers we can pull, and where we might end up.
So both the scenarios, so essentially the first scenario is a 12% increase in year one and a 6% essentially smoothed over the remaining 9 years, with fees and charges in the first year 15% and then 7% in the remaining years, and depreciation used as a balancing item to get to what we need. The capital information that's in here is the all-in capital, so we have not made any adjustments for the capital projects that we discussed last week. So this is essentially as is, whereas, because we've made no decisions about any of the projects. So at this point, both these scenarios have all capital and fair information. The second scenario was suggested by the Chief Executive, that potentially a model that had an increase at the beginning, but then had numerous increases throughout the life of the long-term plan, as opposed to smoothing out over the 9 years. What we've found here is that smoothing in the past has actually been a bit of a hindrance, I guess, because the scenario that was put forward for the LTP last time had a rates hike, but then 4.9%. Now we know that 4.9% was not going to be enough to carry over those remaining 9 years. So essentially what we've modelled in the Chief Executive scenario is an increase with a decrease and an increase and a decrease. So it's, I guess, the scenario then helps us gather probably more realistic as to what's potentially would happen in the future. So, what we've also included on those, can I have a copy, please? So essentially you can see the difference between the two, where the debt cap lies, where the rates increases lay. We've also included down the bottom is the different scenarios around capital reduction required to fit within the parameters of the 2.1 borrowing ratio, the 2.5 and the 2.8. We've also included a line around the depreciation or unfunded depreciation and what that would look like over the next 10 years. Like Nigel pointed out, these expenditure OPEX is going to be looked at closely over the next couple of days to model where we can potentially make some savings. So open it up to you guys. Is there?
I just might add some more to Andrea's. What I was thinking with a scenario where it lifts is to try and start, and this is just put on the table, this CE scenario as it stands is only an example. We need to think about the revaluation regime that we have, and that is cyclical. So every 3 years you'll probably revalue and you'll have an upswing into depreciation. So my thinking is if you're up, then you smooth it, and then you have to go back up to cover that off, and then you smooth it again to try and keep that profit and loss in equilibrium with the revaluation regime. I've also had a look at a number of our operational costs here, and some of them will need adjusting and thinking about. So likes of the 2.1% that we have in staff costs each year, is that too low? Is it too high? We need to think that through. The finance costs, we need to review those because I just need to look at the model as to how that fits, because you can see a climb from 14 to 19 with an increase, and this is a CE scenario, with an increase in debt of 70 million. Now, 70 million at 5% is probably 3 million. So there may be something else going on in there in terms of stuff coming off fixed rates or bonds or something. We need to look at that. The depreciation, again, while the scenario has increases, periodic increases, it doesn't factor in the full revaluations or potential impacts of those. So again, that would drop your bottom line, your surplus that is looking massive in 2034. And also the other expenses, we need to think those there at 2.2 and 26, and whether that's the right number or not. The important number here, though, is the borrowing ratio. If we were doing a pattern like this, we're still in 4 of those years going above the 2.8, but with some smoothing, we got a higher chance of actually keeping it under that 2.8, which is critical. I mean, that's set. We've got no wriggle room on that, so we need to think hard about that. I think the same issues in reviews are still sitting in the mayor's scenario. So again, that will change as we actually go through those. But again, on this one, when you're keeping those rates flat like that, your borrowing ratios are exceeded the entire way through. And that, again, that's something we've got to think about. How do we actually offset that? Sure, we can get that borrowing ratio down by actually looking at our capex and changing some of the timing of that, and or deciding not to do some stuff. Again, we've got to work that through. So I think there's some opportunities here. There's some opportunities to have a really good conversation and actually start getting some parameters that you start feeling comfortable with. And more importantly, when we go out to consult, that we've actually told that we've got the facts there that our ratepayers can think hard about as well.
Yeah, can you explain to me, you're still maintaining the 129 million income this year? And the two numbers there, 70 and 20, add up to 90. So that means there's another basically 40 million income somewhere. So where's that?
So essentially, the difference, you're right, is your subsidies and grants, your finance cost, items that don't necessarily, we can't impact those. So subsidies and grants are, they are what they are.
Consistently over the last few years, we've been around between 13 and 15 million, and with the exception of the year prior, which was when we received the 4.8 from MB regarding the theatre. So my calculations, if you assume that you're going to get 13.5 plus the remaining 6 to 7, that means we're going to have a total income between 112 and 117 million. So if you actually put that number in, that actually makes one hell of a difference.
So Councillor Booth, you're right. I asked the same question, and there are hidden, some of our rows here are hidden. So some of those revenue lines you don't see on this sheet, and some of the expense lines you don't see on this sheet, and they offset each other. So probably in future we'll show all lines to council, so we can try and avoid those questions.
And also I noted we've blown out on the interest ratio. So, that's, again, if we're real with that first number, it would actually be one hell of a lot worse. So I think the first thing we need to do as a council is actually be a little bit more realistic around our income numbers, and we know roughly what our expenses are, and then we can base those decisions around being informed. So that would be my first, my biggest concern, I think.
I guess my biggest concern is the borrowing to ratio to total revenue. Under both scenarios, under the mayor's, we don't dip under, we were suggesting 2.4, we're at 3.2. Even under the CEO's scenario, it's not till 2032 that ratio dips below 2.4. I can't get away from, we need to make some hard decisions around capital projects, and it's no good sending the team away to try and work it out unless we get real around the table at the likes of City Town. Is it affordable at 35 million? Yes or no? There's a couple of things, other things in there that I think there's a number of things we can delay, like the, after talking to Air New Zealand, the terminal upgrade. Nothing's going to change in terms of service or planes for about 8 to 10 years. Also, I'm concerned there's one thing missing. My understanding is we needed to look at a replacement for the library. The roof was going to go so long, but there were some structural problems around that library. It's not in the next 10 years. Even if it's in year 10, we need to acknowledge that's another project that may come on stream.
Are you able to update this scenario here with actually a conservative income number and do it right now, so we can actually, that's going to make a hell of a difference, these numbers that we're looking at?
The structure. But until we pull out all those numbers and actually look what we've got to, because we, hypothetically we could have cut Highfield, there's $1 million a year, it all adds up, and you're going to whack off 10, 15, 20 million out of your capital program. So I think we just need to work through this process, and until we know, we don't know, and just work through with caution.
The 40 odd or 50 million we borrowed last year, or 40 bank debt, 22 of that was spent in OPEX. So, that's the sort of stuff we need to know about right now, because we've actually that money didn't go towards capital projects. It actually went to pay the operational costs. And so hence that's actually really, really important.
I'd suggest someone as a one-on-one and explain that, because we hear this every week, but it's not correct. And so it's not helpful. When we loan for capital spend, we will be always loaning over and above our revenue. And to your point, you're trying to make it isn't around anything above depreciation. You're trying to say is we're borrowing to pay their wages, but it's not correct. So it's not helpful when you're sending information like that out to the public. So if you don't understand, let's get you the support you need.
So, Councillor Booth, my understanding is the 22 million deficit is predominantly a revaluation, which is a non-cash item. Yes, it does affect your ability to replace capital in the longer term, but for that year, it was a non-cash deficit. So it shouldn't have affected the borrowing in that particular year. Now, what we want to try and do today is get some parameters from you as councillors on each of the items that are our moving parts. So that is the rates, what are we comfortable with? The fees, charges, what are we comfortable with? The debt to equity ratio, what are you comfortable with? And once we've got those, we can then go and work with those parameters and come up with a couple or three scenarios to say, here are your scenarios to meet those parameters. And this is what it means to us all, not just us, ratepayers, and also the council as a whole. And I think it's quite vital that we have those, because it's incumbent on us to keep those things within equilibrium. We've got to keep that debt ratio right, because there isn't an appetite to increase it at this stage. It might change, but at the moment we've got to live with what we've got, and we've got 2.8 as a max, and we need to work out where are we comfortable with. When we look at the rates increases, this is a 10-year plan, and sure, by putting in an appropriate increase in year one and then flattening in year two, I need a sense from the council, is that what they want to see, or do they want us to try and be a bit more sophisticated in terms of ups and downs, so there's the community understands that there will be different increases in different periods of time, lining up with certain things that may happen. The fees is probably a little easier because we can actually lift those as we wish, but I also think we've got some work to do in terms of making sure that our costs of doing those things at attractive fee, that we're actually not losing money on them. So that's a bit of work we're going to have to do at some point. And then we need to have that conversation about the debt to revenue ratio, which I don't think will take long, but you guys have got to actually, as councillors, you've got to be united on this is what we would like to see in our scenarios coming forward. So, and I would suggest that we probably start with that rates right at the moment in terms of, I don't think it's served us well in past long-term plans of having a high increase and then flattening that out. I personally think we've got to think about, do we actually have something that is moving up and down in each given year? So I'll open that up to you guys to have that conversation.
There's the debt ratio, and that's fine, but there's also the interest cost and affordability, and I think that's probably one of the key things, you know, that we keep it within 10 to 15%. I think that's as far as the industry standard. I think 15's at the higher end. Andrew, you might be able to give me a nod. Would that be correct?
On the, say for instance, we were to spend 125 million, what sort of depreciation number would that add to the rates?
It depends on the mix of the assets and depends on the useful life. So we'd have to go and work that out for you, because they're not all equal.
For instance, the
average
theatre was about, say if we're spending 50, it was going to be around about 1.5 to 2% impact on rates.
Go find a calculator on this thing. Doesn't have we looking at about 3.7 million on an average? No, it should be within the rate increase that we talk about, if we do our scenarios right, because your depreciation line will increase as we bring that CapEx through, which the balancing number is your rates. Now, if we think the rates are becoming unaffordable, then the thing that's got to give is the timing of the CapEx. Because some of the CapEx you won't avoid. Some of it we have to do.
100%. I think what might be interesting for elected members is if we just give a hypothetical of $10 million worth of debt across a couple of different asset classes. Don't tie it to the asset, but so as an example, whether it's theatre or whether it's a pipe in the ground that might have an 80 to 100-year life, and just what that would look like as far as the debt repayment, the depreciation, just for the understanding. So you can say, hey, here's $10 million, this is, and it's in this asset class roughly, this is what it looks like as far as the overall cost. Even though some have been, we use the term baked in because it's a previous year, but just so people understand what the cost of providing the asset over its life is, maybe.
I could ask Andrew or Andrea, what class of assets have we been revaluing and what haven't we been revaluing?
So over the last few years, it's essentially been roading and water that's been revalued, with the odd little library books and things like that. Art is looking to be revalued, pushed through this year, which last year it didn't make it into the annual report as such. So that was about $15 million. But my understanding is the vertical assets have not been revalued as yet.
Yeah, it's more than just the vertical assets. It's all our parks and reserves assets, which are cemeteries, all the walking trails, all playground equipment, all those assets haven't been done. Our airport hasn't been done. Our landfill and all the associated transfer stations have not been valued either. So basically it's quite a substantial asset base, which is still on those 2005 values.
I'm looking forward to how you value a cemetery, Andrew.
There's a lot in a cemetery. Yeah.
So the crucial class of asset there that haven't been revalued is your vertical. And we're going to be going out and replacing some of those vertical. And when you haven't revalued them since 2005, the depreciation that are coming through the books for those is way understated. Mm-hmm. So while it's not in these numbers, it will be a problem for us at some point, because once you get into that revaluation regime, you have to keep it going. And my understanding is the accounting standards is we should be doing it. So that problem will hit us another day, but it's just a signal to everyone that our assets are undervalued.
It's because pretty much all of it's buggered. It's all been built brand new again, so at least we'd appreciate it as we go. That's the great thing about all these new projects, is actually we get the opportunity to start from scratch and do it properly. So, a few $1 million worth of library, it's not the be all and end all.
Just another point on valuations. Once you start revaluing, then you're going to be revaluing basically on an almost annual basis, as you've seen with the Three Waters assets and roading. So there will be an ongoing cost associated with that.
So I guess in our annual report, there was a other comprehensive revenue of 55.983 million, and I see that in the notes it's made up of, let's see, it was a sewage system, water system and stormwater. So that obviously made us look like that we're cash positive over here. Is that the normal, is that because we spent a lot of money prior in the last couple of years, or it was all just brought through for last year for whatever reason?
It's not a cash positive, it's an income line. So the, last year, the roading valuation was quite low. So in our policy, we talk about if the costs have increased by, I think, up to 10%, then we would look to do a revaluation. So with roading last year, the valuations had actually dropped and they were sitting about 1 to 2%. So hence last year, the roading revaluation didn't have to do, whereas the water was sitting up at about 9.5, 9.6. So the auditors have said, well, okay, so we pushed through the indices valuation, so it wasn't a full valuation done last year, it was an indices adjustment to take into consideration those changes, yeah. So as part of our policy, we can set at what a percentage that we would like to, you know, if it's, like I say at the moment, I think it's 10% that our policy says that if costs go up by greater than 10%, then we need to do a revaluation. So we can look to change that as well.
I guess around the table too, we're going to have to accept the levels of service are going to drop in some areas, not the essential areas, but I mean, I kind of looked at it holistically that we do 2 k's of steel extension a year. Why don't we put that on hold and fix our potholes at a lesser cost for a couple of years and work around those things? I mean, the roundabout outside the library, I think the flowers get changed 3 times a year. Can't we, you know, put some sort of grass in there? I mean, those are the tweaks that we've got to make if we're actually going to save some money. And I think this budget's been built on history, what we've done each year, and actually we need to go back and come back to us and say what's essential and what's nice to have. I mean, again, the replacement toilets, 200k a year every year for the next 10 years. What if we made it 100k, saved our ratepayers $1 million, or did it every 2 years? And that's my problem a wee bit, Nigel, the Chief Executive, not the Mayor, with how the budget's been built. And I think we need to seriously look at it. But again, I think we need to give you guys an indication of what capital projects could be delayed or might have to get tossed out. Because otherwise you're going to come back again with a whole lot of scenarios that won't work.
So can I add to that as well, is I still am really keen to see a list of what assets we own that aren't fully utilised or could be sold. And I'm not suggesting we have a fire sale, but we don't have any understanding of that. All we keep hearing is more money we have to spend. What can we actually realise and help with that debt levels? Thanks.
Councillors, at this point, I'd also like to add that in some of the discussions, I've heard some of you ask for out-of-the-box thinking. And some of our activity managers have really started to come up with some creative ways, and I think we are probably at the point where we can look at implementing some of their ideas that can do things like maybe change some of the plantings so that we don't need so much mowing, or looking at how we can utilize those facilities in a broader way. So bear with us while we go through this. We have about a week of going through activity by activity and to get some of those ideas out onto the table that might be able to offer us some savings, or looking at what can we do that's not going to compromise the quality of the service that we deliver, but it may actually reduce the level, if that makes sense. Okay.
I'd like to see the numbers run at 2.5 with the borrowing to debt ratio, because otherwise we're going to burden future councils and give them no wriggle room at all. And that would be the maximum I'd be prepared to go to.
Sorry. Can I just add to that? And I'd want to keep to that 2.5 by reducing capex, not by increasing rates. above an agreed level.
Yes, no, that's what sort of going on that line too, because for me, I mean, this is excellent and I really appreciate this. This is makes absolute sense. So I really appreciate it, team, so thanks. But I feel like as councillors, yes, you want us to say, you know, how we're going to slash 57 million, but I would, sorry, there's my favourite word again. But I would like the officers also to give me some scenarios. You're more intimate with what this means, and so I just get the big sheets, but you guys really understand the operations across the entire organisation. So for me, I'd love some scenarios on your thoughts on how we would actually, how do we reduce capital expenditure by 57 million? Like, to me, you know what I'm going to say. There's one item, see you later. But that's not a good way to think, is it? So, you know, like we've got to, how are we going to slice and dice?
So I thank you for that, because that's exactly in line with what we're setting up to do. So we wanted today to get out of you as councillors, what parameters do you feel comfortable with? We just got one that you all agree to is 2.5 as the higher level. Great. To get there, we've got to look at capital, so great. And then the next couple we've got to deal with, the next one we've got to deal with is rates, in terms of, are you comfortable with having different rates at different years to match what's going on with some of our depreciation and so forth. Now, once we get those, this team sitting behind me is more than capable of actually coming up with some scenarios to give you, for you to make your governance decisions on, this is the one we're going to go with and this is the one we're going to consult on. And I genuinely believe we've got the wherewithal to do that.
I'm not sure it's fair to put on officers whether we should keep city town or not. You know, we could make some decisions here to make their life easier, because otherwise they're going to come back and we're going to debate it again. I mean, Tauranga spent 100 million on their city town, and this CBD's worse than it is. I mean, there's 36 million we could save straight away by being brave. I mean, we've got to give them some direction, surely, because otherwise it's just being tinkered with again.
I think the scenarios are important, because we've just got to be careful how much direction we give as far as what might be deemed to be a decision. So I think we maybe don't talk specific projects. I don't disagree. I think those decisions have got to be made. But and the key thing from this that we need to get to is actually at the end of it, we've got a capital program that we agree to, and the officers don't go off and say, oh, elected members have absolutely shafted us here, because you know, we need to be working together as one in this space, which is really, really key. So it has to be some, a bit of challenge across the table. But I think, you know, and maybe that's the opportunity. You guys come up with some scenarios. We've got the budget review opportunity, and that can be elected members and SLT, or whatever that looks like, around the table together, just putting something together. I think that would be helpful, because we need to be really aligned.
Councillors, to manage your expectations, I'll be very clear. Officers won't make unilateral decisions at all. What we will do is come to you with some options, with an analysis of the pluses and the minuses for you to make the best informed decisions. And we can make strong recommendations that we think will be in the best interests of the communities, but ultimately, you are the decision makers that your constituents put in here to act on their behalf, and we will support you to do so.
So that thing that Stacey never likes to talk about, so the theatre and the Heritage Hub will be included in those options? I want everything included.
Absolutely.
That we haven't actually built yet.
Yep. We will be presenting with you everything, because you've made decisions around a number of these things, so we must include those. And what we can do is actually look at the things that are absolutely committed. What are some of the things that you may be able to change the parameters? And for some of it, it will be about staging, timing over the 10 years rather than everything up front. And giving you, with some of our BAU stuff, how can we do things just a little bit differently that you can decide, yes, we can live with not doing resealing roads or not sealing unsealed roads. If you make that definitive decision, easy for us to put into place. But it's about you being able to live by that decision when you have constituents coming to you and you say, this is the rationale and the reason why we made that decision. So all the officers are here to support you and put into place the decisions you make. But we will come to you, everything in, some things in, and possibly everything out, so that you get a comparison. But everything else not feasible, and we know that, but we can actually give it to you as an option so you see what that impact is.
Do we have the technology when you bring that back to say X in, Y out, and immediately get the change? Because otherwise we get spreadsheets. I mean, there must be some way of doing that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, look, I agree, Councillor Piddington. What we need to do is come with scenarios with similar things to this, but a very clear set of assumptions of what's in and out. So that you actually get more time to spend on thinking about what's in and out rather than trying to calculate numbers. It's our job to calculate the numbers for you. It's your job to, sorry, I might be out of tune here, but it's your job to think about the bigger strategic decisions you're making on terms of what assets you might or might not do, or the timing of those.
Would it be helpful if you did another one of your polls, Vincy, of these are the top 20 capital projects in dollar amount, and we ranked them? That's not a decision, and I'd hate to make any decision without seeing the models, but it might give you and the officers a flavour of what's really important to councillors and what, you know, we might all agree without actually voicing it, that, you know, a certain project's never going to happen. And I'm not talking about Stacey's project. Yeah, but you know, and if that's what we're all thinking, well, you should just probably not put that in any of the scenarios.
You'll have that this week, Councillor. Right, so now let's look at the things you can do. You have a wee pot of options available to you when we look at the budget challenges. We were looking for the color to go back. There we are. And we talk about increasing your loan funding, and we've discussed that ad infinitum. I've heard very clearly 2.5. That's been quite consistent between 2.4 and 2.5. And Andrea has worked out in that spreadsheet how much in the dollar value it gives you for headroom, which you guys have spoken about before. Higher increases to general rates than forecasted in the long-term plan. That's the current long-term plan, which of course had the, I believe it was 4.9. The limit was at 7. We didn't want to go above 7% rates, but we put it in at about 4.9 on average. Reducing our OPEX, that's something that the Chief Executive is looking into over the next week. Exactly what you just discussed is reprioritizing or delaying some capital expenditure. Increasing your non-rates revenue, and the one that's most directly in your control, of course, is fees and charges. And the mayor has proposed that we look at a flat increase for those that we can. There are some set in statute. Looking at how we can maximize or gain more access into central government funding where it's available. Probably we've tested the limits to that, I have to say, with the current funding regime, but we don't know what's coming with the proposed changes in legislation. Depreciation. Now, this is the lever that is pulled the most in councils up and down the country, which has led us into our current status. By not fully funding for depreciation, that's the, dare I say it, the low-hanging fruit, the easy lever that you can actually use. Probably not the most advisable given our situation. Selling assets. Now, that's something that has been mentioned. What asset listings do we have? And looking at the ownership of it, are there better models available? Should we be leasing more land, getting into partnerships, those type of things? And of course, a hybrid model, which would be a combination of above, which I am going to assume this council will probably be heading towards that. I don't think you're going to be looking to pull just one lever here for this LTP.
I know you've got it further on, Vince, in this presentation, but I think what would be, and it's around depreciation considerations, and you've written we have started to investigate what other councils are doing in this space. Because I think that's key for this, is what is best practice, because it'll be fascinating to see where other councils are at. And we might be middle of the class, we won't be the lowest, I guarantee.
No,
But
you're not the lowest.
but we might be towards the top as well. Who knows? Because there's a lot of pressures in the sector. So then we make a decision around where we want to stay. Do we want to? And maybe that's how we view depreciation, because we're never going to fully depreciate. It's just not realistic. So it's really how much of our we just need to come up with something with our financial strategy, what depreciation is and how much that's in there. Yeah.
I was just going to ask in terms of the Mayoral Forum. I mean, it's probably one of the best connected lobby groups in New Zealand, and you can see what advantage it is to be in there and understand where we fit. Have these discussions been had there? Is there some momentum to know and understand where other councils are within that construct?
We could get the Secretariat to do some work. It's not something we've discussed, because it's normally at high level as opposed to council specific activity that we were talking about. So, but we could easily do that, I would expect. Yeah.
Officers also have access through listserv, which is a local government emailing list that we can actually look for some benchmarking figures. Just put out an email to all councils asking them to volunteer their information, because we do note that a lot of councils don't tend to give everything to the taxpayers union when they do the Lagoima request. But from an officers to officers, we may be able to get some of that information through listserv.
I keep getting the speaker pointed at me. Am I
yeah.
meant to be
It's a
talking to the
subtle-
slide?
It's a subtle.
Look, I'm not, I was going to go through the depreciation, but I'm not sure we need to, because I talked about that earlier. But to say that Mayor Nigel is correct, that we need to work out how we handle depreciation in the longer term, and we need to really aim to, I think you've got to aim towards 100% at some point. What year that is, I don't know, because if we don't, then you keep kicking the can down the road in terms of replacement of assets. And the other interesting part to me is up on that slide there, it says, once a particular fixed asset has been fully depreciated, we carried a value of 0. If you are revaluing, that shouldn't happen. That should not happen, because if you're still using the asset, it should be revalued. And the second point is that the life doesn't get changed, the life should also get changed. We know that we have assets. We know that a life of an asset that we have in our fixed asset register, which we're depreciating to, is an assumption, okay? And we know that a number of assets, if you're looking after them, will last longer. So that's the other part that we've got to work on in the longer term. They're longer term issues. They'll have some effect on this, but not fully effect on this, probably the next round.
On depreciation, we have to be quite real, because obviously in business it's an expense. A lot of the time it's not spent back. So if you look, and it's often when you're just doing capital improvement that you're spending the money. Again, actually the approach is probably no different than a council. The only difference is we need to legally put some aside. So if we give some thought to it, actually it's not too indifferent to how most businesses run in all reality. But to the point, we still need to put enough aside. One thing that I think it would be worth clarifying is that there is two Nigels in the room, and so maybe we go by Nigel T and Nigel B, and that might make things easier for the for the organisation moving forward. Or Mr T.
We've actually been referring to him as New Nigel.
It makes you old, Nigel.
Yeah. Thanks, Councillor Piddington.
Councillors, the next slide was talking about revaluations, but I think we've actually covered that topic as well. So we'll skip through looking at depreciation funding. I think we've actually covered that. We really have, but we've already started to investigate what other councils are doing in this space. I know Jason Rivett's been looking at a few things, as has Andrea, but we'll try to pull that all together so we can give you some really good benchmarking figures. So at this point, what we're going to do is we're going to invite our activity managers to come up to the table, and I think we'll start off with roading. We have Susie here, and then we'll also have Laura and Andrew here for water. And we will take a back seat, and they will actually come up and feel free, remember, kindly ask whatever you would like to know. Thank you, councillors. Okay, you can stay.
Sorry, I'll just note that Andrew's had to pop out. We have a few capacity issues on the stormwater network that's causing surface flooding on the roads. So we are keeping an eye on that. But yeah, just thought I'd let you all know that. He will be back, but we're just checking on a couple of things. This isn't helping.
It's not leaking.
We might just take 5 minutes so we can hear. Yeah. Righty, do you want to get underway? Welcome back, everyone, and sorry we couldn't hear ourselves before with all the rain and hail on the roof. So welcome back, and we're going to go to Susie and Andrew first in regard to the roading activity.
Good morning, councillors. So just to talk a little bit about the roading activity. So we've done a huge amount of work already for Waka Kotahi for our 3-year funding bid. So you'll note on the hub there is some of the plans that we've submitted to Waka Kotahi that look at all asset types, look at the demand on all asset types, the criticality, and we've done some optioneering on various levels of service in accordance with the current long-term plan objectives. So we've looked at all of that. We also do a lot of data capture and modelling for our expensive assets, which are our road pavements and our bridges. So we've done a lot of that work. So these budgets that currently sit in there are reflective of the needs as determined by the modelling budgets and field verification for the next 10 years. We've also done a bit of work, which, sorry you won't be able to see online, but a bit of work here on our risk profile. So looking at what the road, land transport unit inherent risk is and our residual risk currently. And then we've had a bit of a look at what, if the funding that has been requested through this current LTP process is provided, what that can do to mitigate risk. So I suppose start the conversation with it comes down to the amount of risk that councils is willing to carry in the land transport space is around what kind of level of service we can provide for the funding that can be attributed to us. I think that's about all from a quick summary from me, and I'm open to any and all questions and suggestions. Yes, probably like to say again, like we saw at the start, Timaru land transport is measured across the country. And we stack up pretty high in regards to what we can deliver for the cost that we deliver it for, quite often in the bottom third of our peers for provincial councils for cost of what we're actually doing, which is great to be able to see. But it also means that we have been running it pretty close to the line for quite some time, in part, well, mainly from Waka Kotahi, lack of funding of their full share of the program. Council has been funding extra share for some time, although over the last couple of weeks we have managed to get further funding from Waka Kotahi for this final year of the National Land Transport Program. And that was made easier by the fact that council did have local share sitting there that we could say, right, we've now got this amount of money that we can spend on maintenance, operation and renewal of the network. And probably one other quick note is anything savings that we make in capital will tend to, doesn't change the demand on the network. So there will be more faults, so more potholes appearing. So it would increase the operational costs to maintain or significant drop in the level of service and timeframes to deliver. So just, keep that in mind.
Yeah, I think it's important to note too that probably with roading in particular, the elephant in the room is around bridges. And we have got a lot of bridges that are coming to the end of their useful life, and we are stretching them out as much as we can. But some of those big bridges are big cost items, so they will need reviewing. There are options, of course. You don't have to renew. You could actually reduce the level of service, and by weight restricting them, that will have an impact on the rural community, and in particular, because they won't be able to get their heavy vehicles through to the farms or doing large detours.
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. And on that, we've also, within the document that we've submitted to Waka Kotahi, we have listed all of the 41 bridges, looked at that against the land transport lifelines criticality. We're still working with the other agencies to understand other parts of the network might be required for other asset criticality, like access to power lines or water and sewer supplies. But there are some assets that sit on that list that don't currently meet the lifelines criteria. For land transport at least. So I have also included a length of detour should that bridge become either weight restricted or non-operational. We've already got one bridge, it's only a pedestrian bridge granted, but we have got one bridge closed at the moment while we wait to undertake maintenance on it. So they do come. On the opposing side, we also get requests from members of the public to upgrade bridges that are not near end of life for resilience purposes, and, you know, reduced flooding on private property. So we do get that also already.
Susie, probably the key one, just for our understanding, could you just maybe go through and let us know what bridges renewals is an obvious one, it'll be loan funded, but that's probably the key one for this conversation, is understanding in these lines what ends up being loan funded.
From my understanding, around 49% of the total renewal in capital improvement budget would be loan funded. So half of it, of course, well, roughly half of it, of course, is funded by Waka Kotahi.
So it's a loan funded or depreciation funded. So it's, I think it's how it's done. I'm not sure in the accounts, but yeah, basically we are making the assumption that Waka Kotahi will be funding 51% of the program. So therefore, yeah, if you cut a capital works project, then you're actually only making 49% saving of that.
Yeah, I think we'll need some more detail in regard to that. So you've depreciation funding. Yeah, I'd just like to know exactly. So per asset, as an example, per line, are we not saying, well, one's loan funded? So basically you're saying we've got a deficit in the rates that we're charging, and so we have to loan fund.
Yeah, basically any new projects are definitely loan funded. And, you know, likes of seal extensions, for instance, is a loan funded item. It's a new activity. Yeah. But certainly your standard renewal items, your rehabilitations, bridge renewals, a lot of those should be depreciation funded. And yeah, it might be a question for Andrew, actually, are we fully funding depreciation for roading?
Yeah, look, I think that's the breakdown that we need to sort of understand for the capital project, capital program is what is loan funded and what isn't, because there's probably expectation that certain things within this is just rate funded, because you would assume it is. But if there's a deficit in rates, then it's going to be loan funded. But that's, I think, the point that Councillor Booth's been trying to make. You can't keep doing that. So how do we get rates to a point where it's funding, whether it's through depreciation or direct funding versus loan? So that would be really helpful just for in my mind, we should be working through this and we should be saying, well, that's funded through rates or in depreciation, that's loan funded, that's not. So then we can understand over the course of the 10-year plan what the loan funding is funding and what it's not. Is everyone on a similar page?
I 100% agree, because I think that it's not sustainable, that model, surely, because our repayment of debt interest is not, we're not keeping up. So if we continue on this pathway, we're going to get ourselves into trouble no matter what, as in not being able to do potholes because we can't draw down debt.
Yeah. Can you explain the numbers? Say, for instance, this year you've got 19,596. So losses, is that the subsidy that you're expecting to get from Waka Kotahi, is it?
No, so that 956 is the total spend, and we'd look to be getting approximately 51% of that funding from Waka Kotahi, and the rest funded through the depreciation. Noting, though, that there is Transport Choices, which is currently on hold, which would be at 90% funding rate, that 4.9 million line that sits within there. Looking at the operational expenditure plan, there's current allowance for around 11 million per annum for depreciation, which would fund most of the renewal program for land transport over that time frame.
I think, given that the eroding has been recently been revalued, it is on fair value. The depreciation should be reflecting the renewal program. There's always ups and downs in long-term programs, and those bridges are a classic example where, you know, they are very expensive to replace. So there will be perhaps some loan funding required, but it will smooth it out over the longer term.
So just on that though, and I think this is the point Councillor Booth was trying to make, we're only actually putting that depreciation aside if we break even. If we're making losses, that depreciation is not there to be spent, is it?
No, the depreciation, we fund 50% of the depreciation effectively because we're assuming Wakatahi will fund the other 50%.
Sitting there to be spent if we've made a loss in that last financial year, is it? Like, we budget to put that depreciation aside, but if we actually make an overall loss in our budget, we effectively haven't saved that depreciation.
You're
That's correct. It's not cash, no.
No, it's not
Yeah.
cash, but we're effectively not saving it, so the only way to borrow stuff if we keep making.
So Councillor Pye, if you keep doing that, the cash that the depreciation generates, you're spending it on wages and other operating costs, unless you break even, and then you've got that full depreciation amount to pump back into your assets.
I guess my question is, some of the numbers seem a bit arbitrary. Like if we took footpath renewals, we're going to spend 22 million over 10 years. Now, is that an essential or nice to have? And when I look back, those numbers 5 years ago or longer are a lot less. So I don't want to use kind of a lolly scramble, but I mean, these are the numbers we need broken down so we know what's really essential. And I get, as a group manager, you want to do the best you can and reduce those service phone calls down if we're not doing it. But if we're serious about saving money, we actually need to go back and look at these numbers that look rather arbitrary and find out what we really need. And to Michelle and Alan's point, if we're making a loss, it doesn't matter what depreciation is in some ways. The numbers are lost.
I think probably it comes down to priorities, and I think, you know, obviously roading is actually a high priority, as would be water, sewer, and I presume stormwater. So it's like we need to almost have a, what does it take to maintain? And that's done. And then what you would probably be quite good and what would be really nice. So we've got different levels, and depending on how much money we've got left over after we've actually just done the bare basic maintenance, how much is left, how much we can afford. And so therefore you'd get a proportion of those funds, and we're put a priority on there depending on what it was in regards to roading or water. So, you know, it's very hard to just look at big numbers when potentially for the whole of next year, potentially maybe only have 35 million to spend when we've got 125 in the budget. So at some point we're going to have to come back to that balanced point where we actually spend within our ability. And the sooner we start doing that, I guess the better. But this probably doesn't help with the conversation you're having. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for those questions. And I can say that certainly the budgets that have been put forward are to maintain the level of service as per the current LTP. So look, we've done a lot of work looking at the current level of service that sits within the land transport space and how we connect to the vision. So that does meet the level of service. How we've got to that point for those figures has been through a lot of condition assessment and modelling of the network. So there has been a lot of technical data that has been pulled together to get to these figures. And yes, they are a bit higher than they were 5 years ago, but they're not significantly higher than land transport has been spending over the last 3 years. It's been pretty consistent, apart from for cost escalation. So, for example, the road maintenance contract went out to tender and was awarded for contract start on 1st July 2021, and we're now up to 20% cost fluctuations that we have to pay on that contract as per the funding rules and the contract rules, so we have to follow Waka Kotahi funding rules for that, and it's written into the contract. And the reason our fair value hasn't changed a lot is because whilst we're paying 20%, we were still paying 15% last year, so there has been a significant increase in cost fluctuations over the last 2 years, but it's remaining at that level at the moment, which has meant that we haven't had that huge increase to our valuation that we had previous years.
I think the other point to note in particular, if you're reducing your capital spend in roading, therefore you don't get the Waka Kotahi subsidy for that roading. So your revenue reduces, so you lose 2.5 of that revenue in your debt borrowing capacity. So you just be careful here that there's a bit of a water-filled balloon. You move it from one area, it has an impact on others. So.
Looking back, sorry.
I accept that, Andrew, but we've got to save 155 million in capital over the next 3 years, and we say roading's fine. That means everyone else is going to be slashed. I just want everyone to come to the party and go back and look at their numbers and come back with some savings.
You know, we're certainly willing to do that, and there was one obvious one, which is seal extensions, and yeah, you know, that certainly is a nice to have. It's not an essential thing. Yeah.
Sally, Councillor Parker, sorry, you go, jump in.
Thank you. I just want to know a little bit more about the new car park at the south end of Timaru that's under growth, please.
That car park, funding provision is for a car park related to Theatre Royal.
Can you explain exactly where that car park is?
We've been looking at land across the road from the Theatre Royal, been in discussions with TDHL on that and possible developing a car park and a meet and greet area. It's also tied in with the City Town project as well. So.
It's a bit weird when, for the actual Theatre Royal, we can't afford the car park we've got. So, I mean, we need to start to think of these holistically, not shoot off and decide we're doing something across the road without any discussion around the table. I find that we're taking things out of the theatre to make it manageable, and they seem to be slipping in the budget here, which I don't think's the way to go.
It's a different one again, but we just need clarity over it. Just be conscious some of the conversations we've had in a PX environment too, but we have sent a release in regard to that, I believe. Look, I think with this is the key one. If we're, and we made a conscious effort last time, so we added depreciation, which is why we made the loss. We're collecting it after the fact effectively. There was some loan funding in that year to make up the shortfall, but I think we're all of the agreements you can't continue to loan fund those basics. They have to be funded, and or we need to make decisions around what we can. And this is why I think there again we need to get to a breakdown so we know exactly what we're loan funding, which is in our minds BAU. And when we're loan funding BAU and that goes to eroding or playground equipment, we can't. It's not sustainable. To Councillor Booth's point. So that's what we need to get with this process, is understand exactly where we are. And so I think we need some breakdown on this activity overall, just to understand what, and make some conscious decisions that, hey, yes, it's okay to loan fund a bridge replacement because it's got an asset life, and I understand that roads have an asset life as well. But we're just going to dig a massive, massive hole if we can't get on top of this one.
Look, I'd be interested to know what the business as usual numbers were, say, for the previous 5 years. And so obviously we've been getting roughly about 13.5 million from Waka Kotahi. So what would that mean? That we're spending about 24 million gross?
Gross, yes, and that includes the improvement projects and various other bits and pieces projects that the government has come up with, like the Streets for People and Transport Choices work. But for our current funding, bid, this is reflective of that, and there is increases mainly around those bridge and structures over and above what council's currently funding. There's a bit of information, like I said, in that document that we've pulled together that shows that the level of CapEx investment has remained relatively steady in that renewal space for council. The only other ones you'll see up there in subsidisable roading and level of service. There's potential savings that can be made there because they are improvements. But just noting that the one that is linked as Washdyke New Link Road also includes projects like the Southern Port Access, which is across the Heaton Street, Hayes Street rail line, which we've been working with Key Rail for a number of years now, and I'm not sure on the timeframes, but once they tell us that the design is approved, we're scheduled to construct it within 12 months of that timeframe, so it makes it quite difficult as officers to make sure we're keeping that access, dual access open to the Port of Timaru, because at the moment, that's the only other access point over and above State Highway 78 Port Loop Bridge.
I think
we can certainly reduce some of these projects, but just be aware of the implications of that. The Washdyke Road link, it's been on the books for a while, and it won't be done unless we get actual funding from Wakatahi for it anyway, but it is there to show that we, if Wakatahi do approve the business case, then we do have local share. Take it out, we don't have it, so it won't never get through. So there are a few efficiency projects, but not many of them, to be honest. We do stick to renewing and maintaining the assets that we've got. And if we do reduce renewals, then you're going to increase operations expenditure.
So what I'm hearing so far from councillors is a desire to have it presented slightly differently in terms of, here is the program, and this is what's funding those particular aspects of the program. So we should be able to pull that together, which will give you more clarity on where the funding's coming from. And once we get that, we can have another conversation on roading about, okay, if it is being funded out of debt, is that the right thing to do or not?
Yeah,
and so therefore, I'm assuming that's easy to work up. Once we get that worked up, we can actually show that to you, and we can have a more in-depth conversation.
Yeah, 100%. And I think across the entire business, and I know we're working towards, there's some legacy issues, we understand that, but across the entire business, there should be a threshold on what meets what criteria. Hey, if you want this, you need to put a request in to the annual plan, long-term plan around a rate increase to fund it. If you want this, that meets the threshold of a loan, and then it goes down a different pathway. That's what any business would do, so we have to do that as well. Is there any further questions for roading? Let's, go for it.
Andrew, could you give us an update on the farmers' car park, because it's open, it's functioning, and we've got 4.5 million in. I presume if it's open, we can use it and it's safe. So could you give us a wee bit of an update?
Part of my question too is, I can't find it in the report, but the stadium earthquake strengthening, was far, far more than what we first anticipated. And I just worry that $5 million figure is going to become 10 when it gets properly assessed. And so when is it going to get properly assessed? Car park. No, I'm talking about the car park, sorry.
And also, I'd like some more information around the Road to Zero and the transport choices cycleway implementation. That'd be good, thanks.
I'll talk to the car park one first. So the car park is undergoing basically a detailed seismic assessment, where at the moment we have not received the actual final report on that, so we're waiting that. It is a very complex one to deal with. We have done some concept strengthening works, and just last week I've got some figures in from a QS which is indicating that the actual cost is going to be a lot lower than the 5 million that's been put aside. So I'll just, pass on to Susie for the other transport choices.
Yeah, I'll start with Road to Zero. Aware that there will be, and there has already been changes in the draft GPS, and we know we're getting a new GPS as well. So that we have cut that back a little already. That is for around the safety projects, so looking at intersection upgrades in the rural area where we might have had crash history, or improving crossing points or roundabouts in the urban area as well. So that's generally what fits in that safety program. The implementation of the cycleway, that is currently a regionally significant project under the RLTP, Regional Transport Program. We've cut that down from 2 million per annum to 1 million per annum already. So that's really just about the work that we've been doing with the community, with refreshing the active transport strategy, looking at how we can get people moving more by walking and cycling, and also working with Venture Timaru on the connecting the townships and that tourism factor as well. So that was really just that's the $1 million set aside there to implement that over time. That's that one.
Alrighty, let's move on to water. And there's probably going to be a million questions that we can't get answered today as well, but that's okay. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. I'll just have Laura and Grant come up as well, as they're a bit more in the, I don't want to say the weeds, but they've had their hand in the gearbox a lot longer than me on this front. The main sort of point to go through is we spend a lot of work going through, especially around the renewals. So similar to with roading and that, we've got a very good database of all of our assets to go through. We've got a good model around the costings, etc., for replacement. A lot of work has been done on the valuation around it, and we've done a lot of work to get the balance right with how we can deliver the renewal program as assets in the near the end of their life without OFX blowing out. So it's getting that balance right between the renewal program and that operational point. So we've had that, and then, sorry, I should also, earlier one, the documents, I think that Vinci sent through last night, it's an earlier cut going through, so it's not our most recent one, so apologies for that. To go through, so yes, so there has been a lot more work done on that front to go through.
So the wording was up to date, but just the spreadsheet looking part of it, that's from an earlier cut. I just want to make it clear that I've put in a lot of work into digging into the renewals data, understanding everything about it, and I was very brutal in cutting and rationalising what we have put forward to you. So to cut any further would invite great risk.
Can I just ask, in your sewage plans, is there any plan for putting in a sewage system in the township of Winchester? Because I thought that, they're all on septic tanks, and that's really not the future option for Winchester. But is that reflected in this long-term plan, or is that just pushed further out?
It is, at this point, it's pushed further out, so it will be in the infrastructure strategy, just not in this long-term plan at present.
Think that's going to meet the freshwater requirements with all of those septic tanks in that township, or do you just think it's an existing use and they're not going to look at that?
At this point, it's a bit difficult to say without further regulatory guidance. We're still waiting on a lot of guidance from central government.
We're still looking to see where that plan actually changes through.
I just think it would be quite good for a bit of visibility over that, because if you're living in Winchester and you have to replace your septic tank, and then the council's going to put in a sewage system, and it'd be just good to have visibility of that time frame so that individuals in that town can make decisions on replacements and renewals and things like that themselves.
Point taken.
Andrew, the other day when we met, you said schemes are paid for by the users and it's not spread across the council, wider council. With the Sea-Down Water Scheme, you know, there's $10 million, and a quick calculation means to pay for that and interest back is probably $1,000 per user, being there's about 500 people on that scheme. Are the users aware that's kind of the increase they face?
I can respond to that. Yes, we've had quite a few discussions with the users in terms of determining the upgrade that is necessary through that area. And in fact, they're also aware that in fact there are additional costs in terms of their on-farm reticulation that they also need to upgrade. So yes, there has been quite an extensive communications plan previously.
So they're aware, you know, $1,000 a year on their rates roughly on that number when you work out the interest?
Well, we haven't gone to that level in terms of the rates. Where we've talked to them is in terms of the investment that's necessary in total, not down to the actual rates.
But Grant, for clarity, I know, because I had to speak to a couple of the ones from Sea-Down a few years ago, we have been progressively increasing those water rates in Sea-Down, knowing that this expenditure's coming anyway, haven't we?
Yes, we have.
So part of that is in there now. Yep.
It is just the water schemes that, of course, are funded by the users. So in regard to sewer, that's actually district-wide. Yeah.
Just on the water schemes, and it's not a massive capital spend in this long-term plan, but as part of the long-term plan consultation, will we be asking the question about some of those rural stock water schemes and whether they're still wanted, needed, feasible? Because some of them are at quite a cost to people who may not even be using them.
So the only stock water schemes by themselves, that are only stock, is the Rangataurari open race and the Beautiful Valley stock water scheme. So, we are planning some discussions with Beautiful Valley. And because if they are using that, so we're looking at some options for them. It's a really small one, but it's pretty tricky in terms of what we can do there. We don't really want to turn it into a drinking water scheme. So we'll be talking to those consumers specifically on that one. And we, at the moment, don't have any plans whatsoever in terms of any change to the Rangataurari scheme.
I guess my question is, what instigates that conversation with the community? Like, do you just wait until enough members on it ask for change, or I would have thought a long-term plan's a good chance to instigate that conversation?
Sorry, on the for the Rangataura or
for both of them, yeah.
Well,
you're already having that conversation, but does Rangataura just keep going along forever and a day until somebody decides otherwise?
In this long-term plan, we haven't planned for any change at all in the Rangataurari race.
We also have a regulatory requirement where we actually need 75 to 80% of the connected population to actually agree to come off it.
Question on stock water, but I know that Ashburton, they're regularly sending out surveys saying, do you still use your stock water? Do you still want it? Do you need it? That happens on a regular basis, whereas I don't think in my whole time I can ever recall getting a letter like that about the Rangitata one?
There certainly has been. When Rangitata Water was converting that part of it really into the irrigation, there was a lot of discussion with the consumers at that time. But no, we haven't had any feedback, but you're quite correct, we haven't sought feedback.
The last line, W070, city town renewals, it's showing $13.6 million as city town renewals. Is that on top of the 36 million we've allocated or part of it?
That's on top of, because that is basically the infrastructure renewals that are required down the CBD. We've got some very old infrastructure that's over 100 years old that needs replacing, and that's the cost of it. We just identified it.
Separate? No. Yeah, no, he did say it was separate, because it's been in the planning for some time. No, he did. I recall you asking the question.
It will be done at the same time in conjunction with City Town, but it's always been funded separately. It's part of the renewal of those assets. It's depreciation funded.
At some point that will be needed urgently, and City Town, for example, year 6, I can't remember what they're called. Pillars, whatever, your different areas, like if they take 4, 5, 6 years to come to, fruition, this will come before that, won't it?
Yeah,
Some of this is desperate.
This is more driven by the theatre project, and that we would like to get the mains pipes renewed along that section of the road before we open a brand new theatre, and it's not a good look when you come in 6 months later and start digging it up. So we are working with Alpine. They also need to replace their cables through there, and Chorus, and then roading will come in over the top.
So the 13 million isn't for the entire city, it's for the south end. Is that correct?
It's for the area that's needed most at the moment. Yeah.
I mean, that'll be a big hit in terms of depreciation. If we add that on the Theatre 57, you're at 70 million to get it done then, in total.
I think that the answer is that those pipes need replacing regardless, same as Alpine needs to replace their cables regardless. It's just a timing issue. Yeah.
Andrew, can I ask about the Tamika stormwater section there, the Taumatakahu stream enhancement? Is that what exactly is that? Is that a program to improve or reduce stormwater flow into there, or what exactly is that? 1.3 mil over 10 years.
Yeah, sorry, that's on the Tamika stormwater, the Taumatakahu, it's a little unknown, but it is part of our stormwater consent, and so that includes us making improvement to the in-town streams in terms of the environment, whether it's planting or treatment of the stormwater prior or something. It's enhancement of the stream. It may include capacity of the stream or work on the banks. So it's an allocation in terms of meeting those consent compliance at a regular period over the life of the plan.
So the new consents that are coming through for stormwater require an adaptive management plan to go through, so it's the monitoring then improvement or reaction to how the stormwater is impacting the environment.
I can't help but think if that will be one of I suppose, another, a whole number of streams and the likes around the district. What sort of, when you were thinking about the costs associated with that, that some of these activities can be joint community activities to a degree, as we know what the Lions Club's been doing in the stream in Temuka currently, that these might be some of these things that we're able to take to the communities and say, can you help us? Which effectively at the same time helps the ratepayer.
Yes, there's certainly an opportunity and a plan to involve the community in terms of that enhancement. This is specifically focusing on improvements due to causes from stormwater. So it's the urban stormwater and the impact on the Taumata Kahu, in this particular case in Temuka. There's also the urban streams, whether or not they're in Pleasant Point or Geraldine or Timaru themselves, that are funded through the stormwater activity for specific improvements to the stream in the urban environment. Absolutely, in terms of getting community like Lions and others that may help with planting and the like, are very keen to do that.
It just gets me thinking about what other opportunities there are, even outside of stormwater there, that I know communities are very passionate about. And with quality education, I think you will find a lot of people that will love to get involved and potentially, and we can still do these things under council guidance, but I do see those sorts of activities as important, not to remove, but potential cost savings for us even in those spaces as well.
I think as a go forward, and we didn't discuss who's going to be in it, but in regard to that budget review conversation that we discussed, I think we need to, because there's still a million questions that I have, but I think we need to go through it in more detail with the staff in the room. So maybe, Vince, do you want us to sort of put that together now? I'm conscious also we've got a people and performance meeting that will delay that to 12:15, which we need to go into after this. And other people will have further questions, but we need to, and there's further information. I know Andrew sent me some really good info around where some of the funding sources, etc., is from, but we probably need in all reality, a smaller group of people to be able to move it forward. Is everyone sort of comfortable with that direction? Yeah, cool. And then as far as those that just volunteer that want to be involved in that next stage? Yeah.
I think Alan nominated himself, to be fair.
The meetings being in person or just feedback by email, or how does that going to work? Because I'd be keen, just not sure if I'm here for much of January.
Yeah, look, I think we keep you involved and we'll just work out how that works. Obviously be involved. So it doesn't have to be a mass of people. The key thing is that whatever discussions, etc., that are made, that it gets reported back. So, but, sorry, Stace, yeah, perfect. So that's, yeah. Probably
I think we have our frugal five.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Right.
And,
we might be closing the doors if Alan's on his own.
Yeah. The important thing to note is that it won't be that you will be brought in to meet, but you will be the key contacts for via email or whatever, and there will be some meetings between now and the end of January when we're coming back to the whole of council in the public workshops and meetings around budget decisions. But you will be acting on behalf of and reporting back to your colleagues around the table. So that's the purpose of it. Thank you very much. That is great. Now, your standing orders say that the next meeting must start within 15 minutes of its advertised time, which of course is the People and Performance Committee meeting. That the mayor does have the authority to waive that as it is a standing order, but we're pretty much on time for us just to recap what we need from this meeting in order to kind of develop the draft financial strategy. It's about 9/10 of the way there. We just want these definitive figures to bring to you as a draft, and then consequently the infrastructure strategy. So I think we have agreement, and I just want this confirmed by all around the table that you would like the financial strategy to state 2.5 debt cap, up from 2.1, which still gives you headroom. Councillor Booth, you were the strongest opponent to that, so would you be comfortable with what we've seen today? No?
No.
Okay.
I think there's still a few boxes to tick in that regard too, because we still need to look at the core infrastructure projects, debt associated with them, where we're going to max out at versus our comfort level on the community, what they would call the nice-to-haves, but need a whole lot of work. So there's a bit of work that needs to go in there, Vinci, as well.
Okay. Which leads me to believe that the next point may have the same answer when I'm going to ask you about what rates increases limits you want to put on. I think that will also be dependent on what our CapEx program and our borrowings and potential OpEx will look like. Because currently it says 7%, but we're actually proposing that you might have some peaks in revaluation years that will go beyond 7%. So that can change the whole fundamental
I think that's
assumption.
a no-brainer that we'll have to work that through,
Okay. This one I think you can actually give some clear direction on. Currently, we have in the financial strategy, and this was only done for the last LTP, that we would be delivering 90% of the planned CapEx without specifying what that was. It won't really necessarily meet audit's requirements to produce the achievable and realistic capital works program. It was a contentious point for the last audit. It's recommended to return to the 100% delivery with a realistic work program and report by exception if unforeseen delays occur on specific projects. That will also help to improve your transparency and accountability to the community for doing what we say we will do. So I'll leave that floor open to you now to discuss.
Any discussion around that? So it's removing that assumption.
Well, you're not deciding, just...
No, totally, but just a nod to that. Councillor Booth.
I'd just like to suggest that we should base our assumptions on the prior year's income rather than making up and actuals, rather than, unless there's something very specific that we know we're going to get for sure. Because what I've seen today, we're still not being honest with ourselves as to what we're actually going to get this year in the way of income. We've overestimated our income, we've underestimated our expenses. And so when you do a double thing like that, it actually, the way I see it, we're going to have a deficit of up to $18 million. So, and while that's hanging around, I can't see how we can possibly consider raising our debt cap, or because we're obviously not doing things right. So first of all, we need to actually have a balanced budget, and when we get to that point, then the depreciation that we're actually bringing in is actually cash to be spent, and it goes against the areas which that have been depreciated. So it's quite straightforward. So anyway, that's, yeah.
In the interest of time, while you're all in attendance, I'm just going to open the People and Performance Committee, and I'm just going to adjourn the People and Performance Committee. Thank you. Pass back to you, Vinci.
Can I just commend Councillor Booth on his change of language from you to we this week. Thank you, Councillor Booth.
And if this is the conclusion, I just want to say thank you very much, councillors, for your time today. Thank you for those who have actually volunteered to be on the Budget Review Committee. As always, you are free to email any of us on the project team to ask any questions, and we will endeavor to get back to you. Everything that was sent to you last night is on the hub. We will do an updated, revised, correct version, and my apologies for that, of the water supply AMP. And of course, between now and Christmas, you will be getting their updated AMPs. Thank you very much to the officers who came and spoke today. We appreciate all of your efforts that you've been into. Okay.
I noticed Justin's avoided us for 2 meetings. Tell him we've still got our eyes on him.
Yeah, to be fair to Justin, we've had severe issues with internet capacity. Somebody put a digger through a major fibre cable up in Christchurch, which has impacted all of Timaru's Spark connectivity. And we've also had issues with flooding today, which is why Andrew and Susie had to dash out the door at some point. So a lot happening, which is just really a good way to show why we're here. Thank you.